not by lava, not by an earthquake, not by a tsunami. When the most advanced city of the ancient world vanished in 18 hours, it wasn't swallowed by fire, as the legends say. It was suffocated by a silent, invisible wave of 500-degree heat moving faster than a modern race car. August 79 AD, Pompeii didn't burn. It was flash-baked. The Bay of Naples, late summer 79 AD. The Romans called this region Campania Felix, the lucky or fertile countryside. It was the ultimate playground for the elite of the Roman Empire. Endless vineyards blanketed the rolling hills. Luxurious seaside villas lined the coast of Herculaneum, while Pompeii thrived as a bustling commercial hub, home to 20,000 people. The citizens praised the dark, rich soil that produced the finest wine and olives in the empire. What they did not understand was the science beneath their feet. The extreme fertility of Campania Felix was the direct result of ancient volcanic ash from eruptions centuries prior. The land was rich because it was built on a graveyard. They had rebuilt on the ashes, believing the ground beneath them was eternal. Looming gracefully over the bay was Mount Vesuvius. To the Romans, it was not a threat. It was merely a green, picturesque mountain covered in dense forests and vineyards up to its summit. It had been dormant for 700 years. In fact, the people of Pompeii did not even have a word to describe what Vesuvius truly was. The concept of a volcano was associated only with Mount Etna, hundreds of miles away in Sicily. To them, Vesuvius was just a mountain, a silent, benevolent neighbor. But the mountain was not silent. It was screaming. 17 years earlier, in 62 AD, a massive earthquake had shattered much of Pompeii. It was a violent tectonic warning, a clear geological signal that the magma chamber beneath Vesuvius was awakening. Yet, limited by the scientific understanding of the first century, no one connected the trembling earth to the sleeping mountain. They blamed it on the wrath of Neptune, the god of the sea. They cleared the rubble, reinforced their stone walls, and rebuilt the city stronger than before. Then came the days immediately preceding the disaster. The signs were stark and physical. Constant tremors caused the cobblestone streets to shudder underfoot. Deep beneath the city, rising magma began to superheat the underground aquifers. The public wells and fountains of Pompeii inexplicably dried up. A faint, acrid smell of sulfur, like rotting eggs, drifted through the air. Birds vanished from the sky above the mountain, and dead fish floated to the surface of the bay, suffocated by toxic gases seeping through the seabed. Any modern volcanologist would recognize these as the imminent red flags of a catastrophic eruption. But to the Romans, blinded by the limits of their era's knowledge, these were just bizarre anomalies. Unable to decode the physical evidence right in front of them, Pompeii continued its noisy, vibrant daily life. They completely missed their final window to escape. The pressure from centuries of trapped magma finally shattered the rock plug ceiling Vesuvius. The mountain detonated. A deafening explosion ripped through the Campanian sky, launching a towering column of ash, gas, and pulverized rock 33 kilometers or 25 miles into the stratosphere at supersonic speeds. It was 3.3 times the height of Mount Everest. From across the Bay of Naples, 35 kilometers away, an 18-year-old named Pliny the Younger watched the horizon. He became the only surviving witness to document the event. He described the column as looking exactly like a Mediterranean pine tree, a tall trunk spreading out at the top into branches. His clinical observation was so precise that 2,000 years later, modern volcanologists named this exact type of catastrophic eruption the Plinian phase. Then the sky began to fall. It started as a bizarre rain of white pumice stones. The stones were highly porous, lightweight, and warm to the touch. They floated on water, drifting down like an eerie autumn snow. Instead of fleeing, many citizens stepped out into the streets, picking up the stones in deadly curiosity. Unfortunately for Pompeii, the high-altitude winds were blowing directly southeast. The city was positioned perfectly in the crosshairs of the fallout. Between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m., the fallout changed. The pumice turned from white to gray. It became denser, heavier, and hotter. Walking through the streets was like wading through smoking gravel. By 5:00 p.m., total darkness swallowed Pompeii in the middle of the afternoon. The sun was completely blotted out by the sheer density of the ash cloud. The only illumination came from eerie red flashes of volcanic lightning arcing through the sky. For the first time, the Romans tasted the literal shadow of death. The citizens faced a fatal crossroad: flee into the blinding, choking darkness, or barricade themselves indoors. Most chose their homes. Roman architecture was robust, built with thick stone walls. But this choice created a deadly paradox, an ironic shelter. Pumice is naturally light, but millions of stones falling relentlessly for hours accumulated rapidly. The flat roofs of Pompeii were never designed to hold metric tons of weight. From 5 p.m. until midnight, the roofs began to cave in. Survivors cowering in the dark could hear the sharp cracking of wooden beams breaking under the stress, followed by the muffled screams of their neighbors being buried alive. The safest places had become stone coffins. Meanwhile, across the bay in Misenum, Admiral Pliny the Elder, uncle to the young witness, launched a fleet of quadrireme warships directly toward the danger zone to rescue a stranded friend. It was the first recorded naval rescue mission in human history. As he sailed into the falling ash, he delivered a phrase that would echo through eternity: Audentes fortuna juvat. Fortune favors the brave. Around 1 a.m. the following morning, after 12 continuous hours of relentless bombardment, the pumice rain abruptly stopped. An eerie, heavy silence descended over the region. The survivors, trapped inside the surviving houses of Pompeii, thought the worst was finally over. Some began breaking through upper-floor windows to climb out, walking cautiously on the roofs of their own buried homes in the dead of night. Nature was giving them a false calm, but the silence was not the end. It was the prologue to annihilation. High in the stratosphere, the immense 33-kilometer ash column had finally exhausted its upward thrust from the magma chamber below. Gravity began to reclaim its territory. The towering pillar of superheated rock and gas could no longer sustain its own weight. It began to collapse back down onto the mountain. At 1:30 a.m., the collapsing column rushed down the flanks of Vesuvius, generating the first of several pyroclastic surges. This is where the myths must be dismantled. This was not a glowing, viscous river of red lava creeping slowly down a hillside. A pyroclastic surge is an ultra-fast, ground-hugging avalanche of toxic gas, fine ash, and superheated rock. It was a silent, invisible wall of gas heated between 250 and 500 degrees Celsius, that is 482 to 932 degrees Fahrenheit. It surged forward at hundreds of kilometers per hour, moving faster than a modern Formula One car on a straightaway, and burning twice as hot as your kitchen oven. You cannot outrun it. You cannot drive away from it. It vaporizes everything in its path. The city of Herculaneum, located to the west of the volcano, had largely been spared from the pumice fallout. Thousands of its residents had evacuated to the beach, taking shelter inside the thick, vaulted stone boathouses near the shore. They sat in the dark, waiting for Admiral Pliny's rescue fleet. But the 500-degree invisible wall found them. It surged directly into the stone arches, leaving no empty space untouched. At this extreme thermal threshold, the human body does not have time to register agony. The brain simply ceases to function before the nervous system can even transmit a pain signal. The victims inside the boathouses died instantly from catastrophic fulminant thermal shock. It was paradoxically a clinically humane death wrapped inside a ruthless disaster. The first 3 pyroclastic surges were stopped short of Pompeii, deflected by the city's formidable ancient defensive walls. But as dawn approached, the 4th and 5th surges were unleashed. These were massive. They easily overtopped the northern walls, flooding over the masonry and cascading violently through the grid of the city streets, penetrating every alley and slipping under every doorway. Thousands of people fleeing through the dark streets or hiding in underground cellars were engulfed. Because Pompeii was slightly further from the crater than Herculaneum, the temperature of this specific surge had dropped. It was no longer hot enough to cause instant thermal shock. Instead, it brought a suffocating density of microscopic ash and lethal concentrations of carbon dioxide and hydrogen chloride. As the victims inhaled the scorching, toxic air, the fine volcanic ash mixed with the moisture inside their respiratory tracts. It rapidly formed a thin layer of wet cement inside their lungs. They collapsed from asphyxiation and airway obstruction, writhing in the pitch black. Within moments, the relentless snowfall of ash buried their bodies, freezing their final desperate postures for eternity. The city's legendary defenses had utterly failed. They had rebuilt their formidable defensive walls on the ashes of their ancestors, believing the ground beneath them was eternal. In the end, that exact same strength only served to trap them in the dark. 2 days after the eruption, the dense ash cloud finally began to thin, allowing a dim, ghostly light to pierce through. The landscape was unrecognizable. Campania Felix was gone, replaced by a vast silent desert of gray ash. Mount Vesuvius itself had lost its entire peak. Even the coastline of the Bay of Naples had been pushed outward, completely burying the old ports. On the beach of Stabiae, searchers found the body of Admiral Pliny the Elder. Despite his valiant efforts, the sheer volume of floating pumice had blocked his fleet from reaching Herculaneum, forcing him to divert to Stabiae. The following morning, invisible toxic gases that were heavier than air settled close to the ground, suffocating him. He was found entirely intact, his clothing undisturbed. His nephew later wrote that he looked more like a man asleep than a dead body. The brilliant scientist had studied the most magnificent natural phenomenon of his life right up until his very last breath. Roman Emperor Titus dispatched immediate relief efforts, but they were utterly futile. The ash layer was several meters deep, hardening rapidly. Some survivors returned to dig through the debris, trying to salvage whatever precious metals or heirlooms they could find. Eventually, they gave up and left forever. Pompeii and Herculaneum, the two glittering jewels of the Roman Empire, were swallowed by the earth. They vanished completely from human memory, sitting perfectly preserved in silence for 700 years. In 1748, accidental excavations finally reawakened Pompeii. But the most haunting discovery came in 1863 under the direction of archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli. While digging, his team kept finding bizarre, human-shaped cavities hollowed out inside the hardened ash. This is where another enduring myth must be corrected. For centuries, people believed the famous victims of Pompeii were petrified, literally turned to stone by the volcano. That is factually incorrect. The actual biological bodies of the victims decomposed entirely over the centuries. What they left behind were perfect negative voids, empty pockets inside the cement-like ash matrix that had packed tightly around them. Fiorelli had a brilliantly simple idea. He poured liquid plaster into these hollow voids. Once the plaster cured, he carefully chipped away the surrounding ash. What emerged was history resurrected with a terrifying intimacy. The plaster casts captured exact, three-dimensional moments of death. The folds of a Roman toga, the musculature of a man tensed in thermal shock, the precise facial expressions of agony and despair. A mother desperately shielding her child, two lovers holding on to each other in the dark, a slave still bound in iron shackles, a dog writhing on its back, struggling against the suffocating gas. When you look at these casts, you are not looking at stone statues carved for entertainment. You are looking at the exact, volumetric space that a living being occupied in its final seconds. They are petrified memories of a civilization that stopped breathing in a matter of 18 hours. The eruption of 79 AD is often viewed as a tragic piece of ancient history, but to modern volcanologists, it is not history. It is a preview. Mount Vesuvius is not dead. It is simply taking another long nap, rebuilding pressure within its subterranean magma chamber, preparing for the next Plinian phase. Today, the red zone surrounding Vesuvius is home to over 3 million people, including the modern metropolis of Naples. It is the most densely populated volcanic region on the entire planet. If the mountain were to detonate today with the same catastrophic force it unleashed on Pompeii, the results would be unfathomable. Even with modern radar, early warning systems, and helicopters, evacuating 3 million people through the narrow, congested highways of southern Italy before the pyroclastic surges arrive would be an impossible logistical nightmare. The tragedy of Pompeii teaches us a profound lesson about the limits of human knowledge and our arrogance in the face of deep geological time. The warning signs were there, the trembling earth, the drying wells, the dying fish, but they lacked the framework to understand them. Today, we have the science, we have the data, but the human psychology remains dangerously unchanged. We are still rebuilding our massive cities right on top of the ancient ashes, proudly believing the ground beneath us is eternal. Do not ever ignore the silent screams of the earth. She always warns us before she strikes. If you want to uncover the hard truths behind the worst disasters in human history, make sure to subscribe to the channel. History is full of warnings. Let's decode them together in the next video.